Welcome to episode 3 of Welcome Home, the transformation from troops and boots to veterans in the civilian world. We're here to serve you, whoever you are, whether you're a veteran, you're currently serving as a member of the United States Armed Forces, or hell, Armed Forces of any country for that matter. You're a civilian wanting to know more about how to work with and enjoy life with the people that you know and love that happen to be veterans or are going to be going through this transformational period. You've come to the right place. Along with myself and Dylan, we're here to talk about what it's like when you come back home. Today we're joined by our guest, William Toti, who wrote a book from CO to CEO, and we're going to really focus on what it's like. There it is, shameless plug. 1 minute into the broadcast, we already got our shameless plug. I like it.
No shame in that.
Waste no time.
Waste no time. Hey, let's get to it. But really, today's episode is going to focus on you have this experience. You're a leader in the military. Now it's time to come home. So what? That's what we're going to get into. That's what we're going to talk about, and we have an expert with us. So, William, please let us know a little bit about your background, why you're here, why you wrote the book, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate being with you guys as well. And Dylan and Andy, just great to join you. I've been out of the military now since 2006. I was a Navy guy. Hope you don't hold that against me. I did 26 years on active duty, and then I transitioned into industry and as a hiring manager mostly. And then over the course of my next 15 years in industry, I got promoted to a place where I ended up hiring thousands of veterans. And so over the course of that time, what I experienced was that many of these veterans that I hired were struggling in their civilian careers, and started trying to do some root cause analysis and figure out why that was happening. That's the long answer to a short question. That's why I ended up writing the book. I actually left my CEO job a year ago in order to focus on this issue full time.
So when you say issue, where is the disconnect?
So what happens is in most cases, the veteran or the transitioning veteran will end up starting to get his mind right about the transition way late in the process. Mm-hmm. So won't have enough time to prepare for that post-military career. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is when you go through transition assistance, which is what we called it when I went through, whether it's Skills Bridge or whatever form of that you go through, it becomes the blind leading the blind, because the guys teaching that course have never done what the heck they're trying to teach you about. They've never served in industry. Most of them went into that training program, transition training program. They were hired by a contractor. The contractor was hired by the military to teach the course. They don't know what the heck they're talking about. Mm-hmm. They're reading off of a lesson plan or curriculum, and they tell you all kinds of things that are wrong. To the extent that, they focus on one aspect of your post-military career, what they want to do is make you feel really good about what you did in the military and make you feel like that's going to set you up really well for what you're going to do as a civilian. And it turns out that's a setup, where the military is setting you up, because there are aspects of your military career that you can leverage in your civilian career. But if you do that too vigorously, you're going to screw up big time. And so the military, most guys already start transitioning and preparing for the transition late. And then the military gives them a whole bunch of bad information that actually makes it worse on them. And being military guys, when we do transition, we fall back on our training, right? So if you had this transition training and they tell you this is what you should do, this is how you should act, people fall back on that, even if the advice being given is really, really bad. So I ended up saying a bunch of times to guys that I'm hiring, guys and gals that I'm hiring out of the military, so you do understand I'm going to be your boss, right? You understand I'm trying to give you the right answer. Your only job right now in this interview is recognize the right answer when I'm told. And I would face incredible resistance by the person I'm interviewing who says, but no, wait, that's what I was told to say, right? No, listen to me. I'm the guy you're going to be working for. I'm telling you the way it is. Forget what you were told to say. And I got tired of saying this and decided what I needed to do is write it all down.
I'm curious, like what kind of information kind of specifically was consistently brought up in situations like that?
Well, I mean, the first thing that I say to active duty folks is leadership is hard, but it's even harder when you're leading people who can actually quit.
Yeah.
And that's not a situation I faced on my submarine, right? My crew might not have liked my decisions, but there was no place for them to go.
Right.
So it requires a completely different mindset. So that's the first point. The second point is, and the reason I make that point is, most of us military guys, we think by the time we leave the military, we're pretty good leaders. We've all been put. Doesn't matter if you're in E3, to O10. Everybody's been put in a pretty substantial leadership position at some point in their military career. And the ones who think that they can translate that directly into civilian careers are going to hit a wall really fast. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and I call it the great lie. When I was transitioning out of the military, I was told by one of those transition trainers, the only thing your future employer wants from you is good leadership. That's what they think you're going to bring to them from the military. And it turns out that just ain't true. Not only isn't it true in industry, it ain't true in the military either. Right. And an example I use is if it was true, you could take a B-52 wing commander, put him on a submarine, and if he's a good leader, he'd do just fine. Turns out, no, you actually need to know something about those tactics, techniques, and procedures that infantry battalion, or that ship, or that plane, before you can function effectively there. And no amount of good leadership is going to save your ass. And so, again, that's the great lie, that all they want from you is good leadership. But there's several other things like that I go through in the book that, where people don't understand what they're getting into. They find out that they've joined a company and it's a really bad cultural fit. And there's a disconnect. The result of all this is that the statistics show that about 50% of people leaving the military leave their first civilian job within 2 years. Mm. And that's just a tragedy, right? Adds to that stress, adds to, any degree of PTSD you might have already suffered before you started joining. Yeah. If you don't transition well, it's just going to add to those problems. And these are the kinds of things I'm trying to help prevent.
Right.
Well, it adds the ambiguity, too. You go from military, in your case, 20 plus years of, you kind of had, it was all handed to you. You joined the military at 18. Between 18 to pretty near 40, there's not a lot of ambiguity. It's like, well, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to get promoted, and then I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to go to this school, and I'm going to take this job, and I'm going to go live here for 3 years. Like, yeah, there's the ambiguity of, the deployment, the this, the that, but there's not a lot of decision making. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, here's the civilian world. There are no constraints. Mm-hmm. Right? I'm reading a book on self-sabotage right now, and it's like unlimited options is scary for a lot of people, right? In the military, it's like you don't learn to train that muscle of resiliency and long-term decision making because a lot of things are laid out. And then, like you said, 50% of people leave within their first 2 years, and it's like, well, then what? Like, and that's not because you're a failure. Right? You failed not because you're a failure. Mm-hmm. You failed because the information you had of the system that you followed was flawed. Right? Yep. And that's not a reflection of you. Like, you failed, take ownership, but it's a failure of the methodology you use, not you as a person.
Exactly. And to spin off your point, Andy, one of the first things I was told that really started making my mind change when I was in my first civilian job was by a guy, my boss, who'd never served in the military. And he said to me, Bill, you're going to have trouble with this job unless you learn how to live with ambiguity. And so exactly your point, right? And so that was point number one. Point number two is there's a book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. I didn't write it, so it's not a shameless plug, Andy. But that book, what got you here won't get you there. The whole premise of the book is the more successful you were in your prior life, the more likely you are to fail in your future life, because you'll have this inappropriate sense of confidence, even though the conditions have changed, the people have changed, the required knowledge has changed. You're going to think, well, I've always been able to burn through it, right? Power through it. I'll be able to do it again. And in fact, it may be exactly the opposite. And so another great book, the one you mentioned, I agree with, is a good one. But I do recommend What Got You Here Won't Get You There. There's a whole bunch of other things, though, like that. About the difference in the military. You don't have to wait for your turn to get promoted. Right? So that's like, boom, big eye-opening
no politics.
thing. Politics. Well, there's politics, but you have to understand it's a different kind of politics.
Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, time and grade. Like when we talk about the military, it's like time and grade. And the civilian world, it's like it doesn't matter, right? And even more with more and more flexible companies now, it's not your degree, it's not your tenure, it's not even a lot of times even now it's not even how well you perform your job now, right? There's people that are poor performers at their job now they really are better for the next level up. Because it's more strategic, it's more hands off, right? It's whatever, right? There's different reasons why they'll be successful. While in the military, it's like almost everyone has a pretty much same track on the enlisted side until you get to that E7, E8 rank, where it's like, okay, now do I go more operations, or do I stay within my field and become a leader?
Right.
But up until that point, it's like E1 to E6 or E7 is kind of the same. Like whatever MOS you got, that's what you're doing. You do the thing until you lead the people to do the thing, and then maybe you go into operations or training, or you go like in the Army, we call them 00 Gulf, non-MOS positions. You're recruiters, retention, drill sergeants, instructors. But that's the career path. In the civilian world, it's like there's all these variables, and you can't just sit around and wait for your time.
No, when I was in the Navy, I had people working for me who I said, if I'm in the Navy long enough, they're so impressive, I'm going to be working for them. Yeah. And I tell people, you may be, 40 years old when you retire from the Army, and there's some 28-year-old that's working with you. Tomorrow he could be your boss, right?
Yep.
Don't burn bridges with anybody, because there's no rules in that regard. And so you got to be really thoughtful about how you approach it. And the other aspect of that is, unlike the military, up or out, right? So you got to perform in every job, or you won't get the next one. Your point is that your skills may be better suited for the next one. In the military, it's never going to happen. If you don't perform really well in your current job, you won't be considered for the next one. In the civilian world, you might. Yeah, because if your skills are better suited to that job. But in contrast, I've met a whole bunch of people who transition out of the military. 30 years later, they're doing the same exact job they were doing when they first made the move. Yeah. That would never happen in the military either. And they're happy with that. I wouldn't have been happy with that. But if you are, you can do that kind of thing in the civilian world.
Yeah, there was a couple guys years ago. I worked at Home Depot. I was a Black & Decker DeWalt and Porter Cable sales rep. And there was these two guys. They were both, one was an E7, one was an E8. Both retired from the Army, and they were both supervisors. One was a hardware supervisor. The other one was, I think, millwork, whatever. And they were happy. They're like, yep, like 15 years of working Home Depot. It's like like you said, they came in at that job, and they're like, you know what? This is the job I want. This is the level of, and they got out of E7, E8, right? They weren't officers. They weren't going to sergeant major. Right. And they were just like, yep, now, it's like, I'm going to do 20 years in the Army. I'm going to do 20 years here. And they were happy to walk the aisles of Home Depot. And they appreciated what they did. They loved interacting with people. And I remember, again, I was 20, this was before I went to Iraq. So I'd have been 20, 21, like hot shit. Like, man, why don't you want more? But it's like, oh, okay, well, like they got more. That is more, right? That is more than what they had. And again, I used to have businesses across the country, and well, they figured it out, sooner than I did, because I wanted more and I got more, and not necessarily what I wanted,
Knowing what you want is so important, and knowing what's going to make you happy, right?
Well, let's lean into that, because
I was going to say that's
a challenge.
That's a good line. There's, something you said earlier, kind of your first point was talking about the perspective kind of side of things, of looking at how are you actually going to transition, and people step into it way too late. I think veterans oftentimes, I'm infantry, so I know that line of work, and just how much of an identity it becomes, because it has to be for you to be any kind of successful. I find it really interesting when infantry guys step into the civilian world for the first time and realize that their personal identity that they fashioned for 4 years, 8 years, 20 years, whatever, how many years they've spent in, is actually a detriment to them in the civilian world. And it's their first realization of it for some guys, especially active duty guys. National Guard and Reserve guys, obviously, they step into it and realize, like, instantly after they come home from basic training, and they're like, wow, I have to do this for 28 days a month, and then I get to do this for 2 days a month. How do I do that, right? It's a constant switch they have to flip, and that's hard. But coming out of active duty after 20 years and realizing that this whole personal identity focused around this tenacious mindset of constantly getting the job done with no ambiguity, and no obstacles necessarily put in their way, as in politics and people and feelings and emotions and all of these things that are relatively unknown and undiscussed in the military, all of a sudden get just dropped on them. And I see, I'm sure you can confirm this, but I see so many guys just going from a mindset of, look at all this opportunity, to look at all of these obstacles and cannot see the opportunity at all.
When I first transitioned into my first company, which was a major defense firm, one of the VP of Human Relations would ask me to sit in on interviews for people that weren't going to be working in my business unit, have no relationship with what I did, and I was obviously happy to do it. I tell people, when you do transition industry, you got to act like you're starting all over again. You're an E1 or an O1 all over again, because you really don't know what it's going to take to succeed. So I swallow my pride. They recommended a leadership course for me, and I said, I commanded a squadron of submarines. Right? I had 6 submarines. I don't need a leadership training. Well, I swallowed my pride and took the program, and turns out it was a business vision leadership program, and I learned a lot from it. You do a lot of that stuff when you transition.
Yeah.
But this lady who was asking me to sit in on these interviews, after a while, I asked her, hey, look, I think your questions to the transitioning veterans are just fine. Why do you want me sitting in on these? And she said two things to me. Number one, you can say things to these guys that I can't.
Yep.
Because you have credibility with them. And number two, I never served in the military. The only thing I know about the military is watching Generation Kill, the HBO show. And you'd be shocked at how many people admit that. That's their only exposure to the military is watching Generation Kill. And I said, so you realize that even if it's realistic, it was written by a reporter, he swears everything he wrote actually happened. Yeah. People transition, you couldn't tell them. You couldn't tell who those people were when they come back home. Mm-hmm. So forget all that. Forget Generation Kill. That's not what you're going to find. The sales pitch I would give to business leaders is, these people know how to embrace the suck, right? They know how to drive the suck. There's nothing you're going to do to them that's going to suck worse than what they've already had to go through. So once you get them trained right, if you don't just throw them in the deep end and expect them to know how to swim, once you get them trained right, they're going to be your best employees. But you can't think that they're going to know how to do it on their own. You need to understand how to transition them properly.
It reminds me, 40-year-old man, right, who has an education of an 18-year-old, right, a civilian, right, from a civilian standpoint, right, and you look at them and you're like, okay, come on, you can figure it out. It's like some basic concepts that are not trained in the military, and you lose from adolescence. Dylan talks a lot about, leading with empathy and asking good questions, right? Communicating effectively, negotiating. These are skills that you need in the business world, and they are not prevalent in the military. You don't. For those of you listening, William's shaking his head, right? Because we're not taught to negotiate. That's not a negotiation, and unless you're an interpreter I'm sorry, not interpreter, interrogator, right?
Interrogator,
right? There's
negotiation,
or a senior E4.
A senior, yeah. Well, I mean, E4 Mafia, the Don of the E4 Mafia, they negotiate because, you find an E4 that he's got the inside scoop. So he doesn't. He speaks on behalf of the E4 Mafia, and a good platoon sergeant. You make deals on the side where everyone's at peace. You gotta please the people.
But it's true, and even in people that end up in the acquisition world, enlisted or officer, doesn't matter, who think they come into industry with the skills, they're the first ones to fail, because it's completely different in the business world than what you do in the government. I go through. I have a chapter in my book talks about the 10 things I wish I knew when I transitioned, because I looked at business from the government side point of view, right? From an operator, from a Navy operator. And I thought I knew things, and it turns out I was completely wrong about what I thought I knew. And so I try to tell people what the right stuff is. But you need to reboot in every sense of the word when you transition, right? Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, your moral standpoint. You need to understand what the mission is. There is a mission. and the mission isn't to put money in your boss's pocket. But every company has a mission, and I try to help companies explain the mission in ways that are going to resonate, make sense with the transitioning veteran. But you need to come at it completely different. And if you do that, there's got a high probability of success.
So Bill, like what, you've obviously written this book and you've talked to a lot of people. What are the things that veterans have to do to transition well, right? In your opinion, into business. Let's focus it on business specifically. What are the central pillars for you that people have to address?
Yeah. When I mentioned earlier that what I call the great lie was all they want from you is good leadership, and I said that's completely wrong. So when I was writing the book, I said, okay, if that's wrong, what's right? What is it that I wanted from my transitioning veteran employees when they first came to the company? And I decided that there was this thing that's actually 3 words, not one, not leadership, but the 3 words are inform, passion, to learn. And each of those 3 words are important. Informed, because I don't want that infantryman to forget what he learned while he was in the Army or the Marine Corps or whatever, right? I want him to understand. I want him to retain that knowledge and all of those skills, in the coping skills in particular. So that's informed. Passion. You drove through the suck in the military. I want you to be wanting to do that as well in your civilian job. Everybody wants somebody with fire in the belly, but it's going to take a different kind of mindset when the mission isn't defense of the United States, but the mission is something else, right? The company's mission. And you need to make peace with the mission and find a way to get that fire in the belly back in your new mission. So that's informed passion. And the third bit is to learn, because you're not going to come into the job knowing what you need to know to succeed. The ones who come in thinking they know what it's going to take to succeed are the ones who are going to fall flat on their face within months of transitioning. You got to be willing to learn. And in every job you had in the military, you had to learn something. Starting in boot camp, going through your, infantry school, whatever it is, you're always learning. And you need to carry that forward, because the truth is that most civilians aren't put in a position where they have to learn as often as we did. You change jobs every couple of years, or change units every couple of years. You need to learn, the TTP of the new unit or whatever it is, the new MOS if you change, or the new rank if you become platoon sergeant. So you're learning all the time in the military, and you need to continue to learn in industry. And I find that the military guys are way better at learning once they figure out they need to.
Yeah, because the skill of learning, like I mean, researchability is a testable skill in the military, right? Yep. How well do you find the answer? And in the civilian world, that's normally not right. We don't want our employees finding the answer. Right? We give them the answer.
Tell them what the answer is.
We tell you the answer is. We don't want you to find it. And also, unlike the military, the answer is normally not written down. Right? If we don't want you to find the answer, we want you to make the answer. Right? Like you hear that all the time in the civilian world. We'll figure it out.
Yeah,
military
doctrine.
Yeah, exactly. I don't recall ever in the military in a school they're like, "We'll figure this out." No, hit Control F, right? Find it exactly, and then make sure it applies accordingly, right? Make sure you're looking first the right regulation or TM or whatever, or FMTC, whatever. Like, and then once you're looking in the right spot, you will find the answer.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, most companies don't have a database of where the answer is. They have some culture and some ethos and maybe some basic SOPs and very, very tactical things. But the military, here's the doctrine. Here's what governs the decision making. Right. And then we get downrange and it all goes to shit. Like, exactly. I mean, I can only imagine on a nuclear sub, right? I drove a truck, right? I had a lot of flexibility, right? Gas on the right, brake on the left, keep her on the asphalt. That was about my SOP, right?
Right.
I got to imagine on a nuclear sub, you're not just hot dogging it out there, turning left and right as needed.
Stay alive.
Yeah, stay alive.
Operate the reactor safely and don't run aground, right? Don't run into the bottom. Don't go too deep and sink. Yeah. But there's a lot of that kind of. You're not going to be almost never going to be in a situation in the civilian world where your life is at stake.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the other things. People get really relaxed. Yeah. Well, nobody's shooting at me. Yeah, that's true. But if you can't pay your mortgage, it's a big deal. So don't act like it's not important. And the other thing I'll say, Dylan, to answer your question, that I keep pounding the table on with my transitioning veteran friends is this business of return on investment, ROI. The company's going to be willing to invest in you if they think they're going to get that investment back. If for whatever reason they don't think they're going to get that investment back because you spent too much time doing things instead of working, or, before you join the company and now you're too old, it's like some guys who transition really late in life, or, there's your attitude indicates that, you may not be around for long. Whatever reason that you give the company that you're not going to be around long enough for them to get their investment back in you, well, they're not going to invest in you. And that's not the kind of job you want. You want the kind of job where they're actually going to invest in you, make you better. And it's going to lead to more progression.
And also that you want to invest in, right? Like, in the military, right? Like we talk, I'm a career counselor. There is a dollar amount assigned to retain a soldier versus what does it cost to equip a soldier, right? Let's say it's $100,000, which is it's about that, right? To recruit, and train. Just get them through basic training. It's about $100,000, right? Yeah. So the Army will always make another investment. Send you to a 2-week school is a big nothing burger, right? It's a $5,000 investment but you already got a $100,000 machine that you built, right? In the civilian world, you're right. If a company's going to invest in you, you got to be investable first off, right? And then also put the work in, because to your point, I've seen it plenty of times. Here's the downside. When you get out, let's say, that 06 level. I see a lot of 06 kind of E8, E9s that are getting out that come to me on LinkedIn. I'm having a call with a guy this week. He's got a phenomenal resume. He's got a master's degree, 20 plus years in the Marine Corps, getting out as an 06. And it's like, if you think you're going to walk into a $150,000 job, if you think you're going to walk into the same type of money and benefits that you had in the military, you have to reset your expectation. You might have been up a lot of rungs on one ladder, but you ain't on that ladder anymore. Yeah. And the business world ladder, it's a different ladder. Right. I'm not saying you got to start. I'm not saying you got to start by scrubbing toilets, but you're not walking in as a CEO.
Yeah. No.
And recognizing that.
Unless you make your own. Unless you make your own.
Correct, unless you make your own business.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
one of the things I tell people, that guy you're just talking about, right, 20-some year master's degree, too many folks that are getting out say, well, I need to get to an MBA. I say, dude, two more years in a company, way better than two more years of school.
You need to get a job.
You need to get a job.
J-O-B. Right?
You know, I've taught MBA courses. I've taken some MBA courses. Let me tell you, when you get to your company, almost none of it's going to be relevant. None of it.
An MBA looks really good for a 24-year-old's resume that has nothing else other than that.
Mm-hmm. And
right?
That's the aspect, right? Everyone you're competing with, this is a point you made earlier. Everyone you're competing with, when you transition with 0 years in the company, you're competing with that 23-year-old.
Yep,
right?
and they're willing
also
to
has 0 years,
and they're willing to come in at $60,000-$70,000 a year.
Yeah,
and they got 20, 30 years of potential investment to grow, and they got. I mean, let's think about us when we're in our mid-20s. Hell, Dylan's still basically there. But, we could go 12, 14 hours a day. We didn't have a wife and kids. We didn't have obligations. We didn't have a mortgage. Our company was number one. You get out after 40, at 40 years old with a wife or a husband and a couple kids, like, you're not about to be like, oh, I'm willing to give 80 hours a week or 90 hours a week. You just spent the last 20 years giving it your all. This is your second career.
Yeah.
You're kind of burnt up.
This is like the difference of like a senior E6 that's been to Afghanistan 3 times versus a brand new lieutenant from West Point, right? Like if you're going to war, who are you going to pick? Well, the company's going to pick the E6 because he knows what he's doing. And that LT doesn't realize that he's stepping into an experience without experience. And, that shame of not being picked or whatever that is, that's kind of what I'm really curious about in veterans, is that they step out of this environment of whatever you want to call it, that experience of being in the military for as long as you have been and being almost looked up to, revered. We're called heroes now. We're thanked for our service on a daily basis if you're in uniform. And now you step into a civilian world where you are nothing compared to what you were, right? And you don't have this uniform to say, hey, thank me, right? You don't have that ability or that kind of requirement for people to recognize that your time in service, your time in grade, or all the things that we have that tell us in the service how useful we have been. You step into the business world for the first time and you realize, like, you have to recognize that you have no experience and no applicable skills to represent that experience until you've actually used them, right? And that's kind of where I find it really interesting to see personality shifts through that.
Yeah, but of course you can learn them pretty easily, and so I don't want to be too downtrodden here in the conversation. You may not have them day one, but you're going to learn them. And this is the point I make in the book. You'll learn them faster than that 23-year-old straight out of school, or an 18-year-old straight out of school, maybe joining the company with the same amount of company experience that you have. You're going to learn faster than that person. So you're still the better bet, still the better investment if you come in with the right attitude.
Right.
But one of the things I talk to companies about, because I do a lot of talking to companies, is I said, you guys, I love the fact that you tell us thank you for your service. Until you say thank you for your service, you're fired, right? Because here's what happens. Your military background is going to be intimidating to some never served leaders, managers in the company. And they're not going to want to have that hard conversation with you if you're screwing up, whether it's a leadership, failure to use appropriate business leadership methods rather than,
knife hands,
E7 leadership methods, whatever it is. If you're screwing up, they don't want to have that hard conversation with you. Some of them will hope you feel kind of out, not a good fit culturally to the point where you quit, so they don't have to fire you. So they kind of let you fail.
Yep.
And let you fail in lieu of having that hard conversation with you. So I tell companies, don't say thank you for your service until you know that veteran's going to succeed.
Yeah.
Because the worst thing you could possibly do is this thank you for your service, you're fired bit that I just see way too often, because they wanted to say thank you for service because they think they're supposed to, or they think it makes them feel good. But then they don't want to do what they need to do to help you. Rather than just say something, actually do something to help thank you for your service. They don't want to do that bit, right? So I got a part of my talk where I say, stop saying thank you for your service. And it surprises them until I provide the context, which is, if you're the kind of person who can't have the hard conversation with your veteran employees and you're going to end up letting them fail, it's worse if you say thank you for your service than if you don't say it. That's the...
I feel like that's pretty common, where leaders just have that that feeling of intimidation of veterans, of their whether it's their personality or their experience. I don't think it really matters. I think this happens in the civilian world, where it does happen in the military, but it's less prominent because of time and grade. Time and service can get you that next promotion and get you away from that situation, where the indirect kind of we don't like you, so we're just going to kind of leave you in this failing position happens a lot more in the civilian world, because it can, right? And
it's easier,
right? And bad leadership can
somebody's severance and
and that's in my experience, like the ability to be humble and kind of like Andy kind of led for me, lead with empathy, leading yourself with empathy, and recognizing, because we can recognize bad leaders. We're all pretty good at it when you're in the military for long enough. Recognizing that and leading with that empathy of, like, this guy doesn't know how to talk to me. He doesn't know, he doesn't understand, he doesn't want to, and leading with that humility and that ability to recognize what that person can and cannot do, rather than look at them as an obstacle. You inform them, right? Like you come up to them and say, hey, I feel like things aren't going well, and I want to solve that problem. I want to solve it with you. Whether I want to solve it for you doesn't matter. I want to solve it with you. That ability to be humble can really change the dynamic of a workplace environment, I think.
Absolutely. One of the first things, you guys won't be surprised to hear this, but when I got hired into my first company out of the Navy, despite the fact I was a transitioning 06 major commander, right, brigade level commander, I got hired into a leadership development program. That's exactly what they called it. And of course, I could have been upset that they thought my leadership needed to be developed. But it was a bunch of training, and I was really, really happy I took that job, as opposed to some others that I might have taken. The point is, in this process of learning how to lead in business, early in my tenure, I was asked to sit in on a termination meeting where we were terminating a retired one-star.
Oof.
Can you believe that? And the reason we were terminating the retired one-star is poor leadership skills. And this is when I developed that line I opened with, which is, leadership is hard, but it's even harder when you're leading somebody who can actually quit. Because his team was quitting, and he wasn't sensitive to it, or didn't care, or thought, look, if they aren't tough enough to handle me, then they don't need to work here. Whatever it wasn't empathy. He wasn't leading with empathy. And the guy got fired, despite the fact he was a retired general. And that was really eye-opening for me. And what I learned was, over the course of the next 15 years, some of the worst leaders I encountered were transitioning veterans, or transition veterans, right? So, I remember one transition 06. It was just, I had to fire him. I mean, I couldn't, he was destroying his unit, and I had to let him go. And so it's just one of those things where if we're humble and we're sufficiently aware of our weaknesses and strengths, and we look for feedback, and we try to develop this emotional intelligence that maybe we didn't need to develop when we were on active duty, and be a little bit more sensitive to what people around us were thinking, you're going to succeed. You got all the skills you need to succeed, but you're going to need to draw on a whole bunch of skills you didn't need in the military.
Gotcha. What are those skills, right? I mean, a lot of people that are listening to this podcast, they want the answers to the test. I know they're going to buy the book from you because we told them to, and it was a good idea. But what are, right? And we also you also talked about they start the transition too late, right? I was told so I'm a career counselor, right? I was told that when considering retention, we consider retention the day that they raise their right hand, right? And that's it, right? Your retention journey starts the day you join the military. Hell, it might even join when you walk into a recruiter's office for the first time, right? Because now at that point, you're like, okay, you already, again, you're not counting down a clock, but same thing. You got to think about your next career the day you join the military. You're 17, 18. You got to say, okay, what do I need to do today when I get in the military so that when I leave, I'm better than when I showed up? Because to your point, if you join at 18 and you get into this groupthink, echo chamber, military way of living for 20 years and you come out, you're worse off day one than an 18-year-old that doesn't know, his ass from a hole in the wall, right? Now, I would argue, again, we know that with time, you're going to, skyrocket, but day one, you're rough around the edges and not ready for the world. So what are these, first, when is the right time to start thinking about it, especially on the active duty side, because Dylan and I are Reserve and National Guard respectively. When is the right time to start thinking about it? And what are the things that you have to start telling yourself so that you're open and receptive when you hit, as you're hitting your boots on the ground?
Well, just like you should start thinking about retention the day a guy or gal raises his right hand, you need to start thinking about transition if you're the active duty person. Same time. Now, I will admit to you, I didn't, right? So it's one of my failings that I try to correct with people in the book. When I was commissioned in 79, I had a 5-year commitment, and our motto was out the door in 84. And because that was 1984, probably when way before either of you were born.
I was born in 84.
Okay.
Strong.
I was supposed to leave the military in 84. Exactly. But, from the retention standpoint, nobody had a grand plan for keeping me in. Maybe they thought they did. But I kept getting one, and next job seemed pretty interesting. Okay, I'll stay in for that one, then that one, then that one, then that one, then that one. And pretty soon, 26 years had gone by. And I was saying, holy cow, I'm approaching my mid-40s. If I don't get out now, I won't have a second career. I'm just going to have a job because I won't have enough time in my civilian industry to have a second career. So I started thinking about the transition issue way too late when I was, in my 40s. And what I realized at the time was, you got to start at least, and I'm talking hard preparation, at least 2 years before you get out.
Okay, I've heard that. That seems like a pretty logical period. 24 months to start prepping the battlefield for your embarking on the new mission.
Right, and the first thing you need to do is figure out where you want to be in 10 years. Okay, and I tell people, look, if you want to be, just kind of chilling, that takes you down one career path. If you want to be hitting your peak earning potential, that takes you down another career path. If you want to be doing what you love, that takes you down another career path. But you need to, that's the most important decision, not what job am I going to take when I get out, right? Or what should I study to prepare for that? No. Where do you want to be in 10 years? When you figure that out, and if you don't figure that out, what it means is you're going to be on that random road. The old joke that if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it's like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Start with the end state in mind, right?
Exactly.
And here's where you can start cutting down the ambiguity. This is the magical thing. You all of a sudden have this magical wand that you never had before, which is called you decide. Right? In the military, you don't get to decide, right? You're like, all right, what's your first duty station? You put down Germany, you put down Hawaii, you put down Korea, and you end up at Fort Sill.
You're going to Kuwait.
Kuwait, yeah, Kuwait don't count. Yeah. You get set pay, no hazard duty pay, right?
Yep.
But exactly, right? So that's, you're right. 2 years, it's like, okay, you're right, because guys are like, well, where am I going to live and what am I going to do? Well, hold on. What does success look like?
Right.
Yeah,
because
that's exactly
right. And you have to start thinking. You have to think very strategically, right? What is success? Like you said, if you want to sit on a beach, cool, right? You could be in Florida at 38 years old and fully retired and living on a fixed income for another 30 years, and working maybe a part-time job just so you get a little bit of spending cash and figure it out.
Yep.
Right?
If that's where you want to be, yeah.
Right. Can you do that?
But I do
Maybe.
say, yeah, when I say where do you want to be, I mean metaphorically, not physically.
Yeah,
'Cause
exactly,
the second thing I tell people is forget location.
Yep.
That should be at the bottom of your priority list.
Yep,
What
that'll
should be at the
answer
top
itself.
of your priority list? Yeah. Is the position that's going to take you in the direction you want to go, metaphorically, career-wise, not location-wise. Because when people say, well, but I got to live in near San Diego, where you've just reduced by a factor of 10 the opportunities that position that's going to take you in the direction you want to go metaphorically. So, okay, now that's a different problem. And in fact, it may not be a problem that can be solved. The solution set may be a null set, right? So that's the least important thing, has to be location. The most important thing is, does it get you in the right direction? Second most important thing, is it going to get you a lifestyle that you can support your family with if you've got a family? The least important thing is, the city. And so those are the things I think tell people to start planning on 2 years out. And then that all needs to congeal before you can make an intelligent application for a job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The other thing I would say is be very, very careful who you take advice from. A lot of people will take advice from the wrong people who are civilians but ain't doing particularly well and don't know it, or aren't moving in the direction that you want to move. And so you get the wrong advice, and you think it's the right advice. And I've seen a lot of people burned by that kind of thing too.
Well, and that's the challenge, like you said from the top. If you're listening, I get a kick out of whenever I see government contractors. They're like, I'm a civilian now. I'm like, you're a GS something. You put the boots away, and the next day you put on shoes, and you're reporting in the same base, and right, your chain of command is different, but and also you have the same mindset. That's the other thing, right? Mm-hmm. When you're a DA or DOD civilian, the culture's the same. The mindset's the same.
Military 2.0.
Yeah, it's military 2.0. And like you said, often those are the ones teaching the class, or they're reading out of a book, or they're reading out of a manual. Right? It's check the box training, which it didn't serve you in the military. There is no such thing as checkbox training in the civilian world the way there is in the military. Right? There's some things that your sexual harassment and your different classes you have to take within an organization to make sure you're. But they take it. I don't know if I say more serious, but it's a real deal. While in the military, there's tons of things where it's like, remember when you signed here? Well, now you're accountable for knowing everything there is to know about something, right? And you're going through the motions. And in an organization that's 1 million people strong, like the U.S. military, that's the way things are. But when you get into a smaller corporation, you can't just check the box or just show up. If you don't know what your role, the responsibilities are, what your job is, you're out. Like you said,
if you're not adding value to the company, you're out. Yeah.
That's it.
Your DOD civilian example, there's something that's even more dangerous than that, though, because a lot of times those kind of jobs are contract jobs where you're working for a company, you're not a DOD civilian. And I spent a lot of time in the book on those kinds of jobs where you think, okay, I'm doing the same job I did on active duty, but I'm working for company X instead of I'm not a GS, I'm a contractor. Well, the problem with that is those contracts are required to be competed. And the way the new company wins that competition is by bidding less than the old company. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to keep your job, you take a pay cut. That doesn't happen to you if you're a GS, but it will happen to you if you're a civilian contractor working for the government. So really warn people about those kinds of jobs because people get shocked that, wait a minute, you mean if I want to keep doing this, I got to work for less? I thought over time you were supposed to get pay raises, cost of living allowances. Now, the government pushes your compensation down, not up, if you're a contractor.
Yeah. Did not know that.
It's a very temporary position.
Yeah.
Well, and it's a race to the bottom, right? Like that old adage, right? The military and the government, right? It's the lowest price bidder. And if you are the service or you are the product, it's the lowest price bidder.
Yep, and you're going to be the lowest. In the book, I call it the lowest price brains. I want you to send me the lowest price brains you can find. Now, who wants that? Right? So those planners working for U.S. Army Europe are doing war plans for Ukraine right now.
Yeah.
They're really happy to know that they were the lowest price brains the Army could find because that's how the contract was awarded. I guarantee you China's not looking for their lowest price brains doing their war plans.
Yeah.
No. Well, without getting political, yeah. This is the part of the show where we back down that road and go back to the fork we were at to keep things progressing along. Otherwise, that's a whole other podcast. Oh yeah, that's a whole other podcast. I'm still in the Army Reserve, so I have to mind my P's and Q's to a certain extent. I'm a career counselor too, so it's like I've been in the military. I've been in the Army now 18 years, going on 19. I've signed the dotted line more than once. Right, so people are like, "Hey, you drink the Kool-Aid?" Hell, I serve the Kool-Aid. I stir it, I serve it. I add the sugar. I do the whole 9 yards. Right,
Yeah.
but right, and for those 2 days a month, I do the thing. Right, I show up proudly. Right, I shave my face, I cut my hair, and I really do give a shit about the job I have. But
of course you do.
And I hate to use the word. I don't like to use the word but and I also know the civilian world is a big scary world out there. And I know if you are under the impression that the military sets you up for success in the civilian world, that's not the reality. The job in the military is to train warfighters to win wars. That's it. You join you join the military, you go to basic training, boot camp, whatever it is. You go through this whole process that's well defined, well documented, well regulated, with a bunch of other Joes, 150, 200 Joes, and you go out and you become this product of what the military needs you to be, right? And you get an MOS, and you became a lethal tool to the U.S. government, right? They do not put that much time, energy, and money into, now you're going to be a really good civilian, right?
Maybe 2 days.
2 days. It's a 2 day, you sat through the class, here's the pamphlet, call me, right, if you're having suicidal ideations.
Yep.
And here's your terminal leave check. Your bags are packed. Don't let the door hit you where the good Lord split you, right? And now it's our opportunity, right? And you take it upon yourself. Obviously, you put you don't put your money where your mouth is. Writing a book and putting yourself out there, and even to a point where, help me if I'm wrong, this is your full-time jam, the book and speaking and consulting, because there's a huge gap. And now the gap is going to be less because we're not fighting as many wars as we were, which is a good thing. But it still exists. There are still people that join the military sometime or around the year 2000 that have really only known this world of a nation at war, and they're my age. I joined in 2004. I graduated in 2002. But they're getting out of the military now, or going to be getting out of the military in the next 10 years. And they're not going to know a war or a world without wars and a purpose and lack of ambiguity.
Yeah.
And they're going to start getting back home here and not knowing where to start. And like we all said, right, I think a start, stop, continue methodology of change. First thing you got to do is stop listening to those, like you said, that haven't gone through it. Stop listening to those that aren't hiring you. Stop listening to those that are just reading off of a pamphlet.
Stop listening to those that haven't succeeded.
Oh, that's true. That was the other thing you brought up. Yeah.
And doing what you would like to do.
And start listening to a lot more people than just one. Right? Like the person you go to for advice, don't just listen to that one person. Go find as many as you can that can give you a very wide perspective on what is a way to be successful, because there's not just one, there's thousands of ways to be successful.
When I got people that hit me up on LinkedIn, they're like, hey, what would you do if I was you? Well, I'm not you, so I don't know what I would do. If you're an 06 Marine Corps, Navy, Army, Air Force, right, logistics person, I don't know what I would do if I was you. I would go find 50 other people like me, and also I would figure out the last 06 or the last E8 or E9, right, and figure out what made them successful. Like you said, who do you want to emulate? Mm-hmm. I'm a career reservist with a couple deployments in a business. Yeah. And unless that fits your profile, I am a perspective. That's the other thing I've noticed too. Veterans, it's like they're so used to going one place and getting the answer. It's like I'll sit down and talk to them. They have a list of 10 questions, and they expect me to have the answer to every question. It's like I can answer it for me, but I can't answer it for you.
Right.
And that's a struggle.
Yep.
So with respect to time, we're coming up on the hour here. What are some top takeaways you had from this conversation, William, or things that we didn't cover that you cover in your book that are really important for our audience to hear?
Well, in the book, I do describe various career paths and things like that, just so people understand a little bit about what they might be getting into. I also talk about, the basic company structure, what they should care about, what they shouldn't care about, so they get a little bit more comfortable with corporate. We said a while ago, I had advice that I need to learn how to live with ambiguity. Also, the other bit of advice I got was there's no such thing as a chain of command in the civilian company. There's an organization chart. Do not mistake that for a chain of command, because if you use the excuse that, well, I couldn't get through Bob, and you fail, that's your failure, not Bob's failure. So it's not.
You go to the military, you go into any major building, and there's a picture of the President of the United States, right, and the Secretary of Defense,
yep.
and then everybody else, and that is gospel. You go to a civilian company, and you go to their About Us page, and it's like, here's the CEO picture from 10 years ago, and here's some other people that are probably on the leadership team, and then that's kind of it. And if they're even if a company has an org chart, like you can follow it to a T, but it's like, but if you failed, it's still on you.
Yeah.
Like nothing stops you from sending an email to somebody else internally if you're not getting
including
your
the
questions
CEO,
answered. Including not limited to, right? And also, I guess in that same vein, this is a magical thing that we don't listen or hear in the military. Sometimes the answer is within your subordinates.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Rarely does that happen in the military, but in the civilian world, you have to listen to the frontline people. They're the ones with the answer. I own a junk removal company, and every time the guys come back, I'm like, hey, what'd you learn today? And it's like, one of the guys the other day finally was like, why do you ask me that? I go, because every time you tell me what you learned, I'm probably learning it too. Because I either forgot it or I didn't know, but you guys see it all day, every day. I sit in an office for the most part, or I'm at networking events, or I'm traveling. They see it every day, right? Mm-hmm. They know when the batteries are dying on the tools. They know when the trucks aren't clean, right? They know when waste management hasn't flipped our dumpster. They know those things. I know the answer, right? Well, charge your batteries at night, clean your trucks at night, and I'll call and talk to waste management about why they missed us again this week, whatever. But it's important there too that you have to recognize, like you said, a chain of command is hard and fast in the military. In the civilian world, it's a starting point on who kind of signs your check, but that's it. So appreciate that.
The last
Dylan,
lesson is,
go ahead.
No, the last lesson is they have a right not to hire you, and they have a right to fire you for pretty much any reason they want. So Be careful, what you say, what you do on social media, because that counts.
Yeah.
Oh, and I can tell you as an employer, if I don't know about something, actually anybody, hell, even when I got introduced to you, first thing I do, copy and paste your name into LinkedIn and then into Google, and I'm like, hey, what's this cat all about? I hadn't even met you, and I already did my due diligence.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So if you had stupid stuff on social media, that will prevent you from even getting the interview. I like that. Mm-hmm. Top takeaway there, Dylan.
I love the leadership is hard, but it's even harder when you're leading people that can quit. I've always looked at my military career like that And I think that's why I've been so successful with I've only run really squads and platoons. I treat people as if they can quit. Because regardless of whether we own them in the Army, they still can quit either mentally or physically. And so I've always used that in my own capacity, but I love that looking more from a civilian perspective and looking at people, because it drives home the perspective necessary to survive in the civilian world as a leader, and realizing these people can just walk away and then you're left with nothing and you're left with this mess that you have to clean up. And if production stops rolling, guess what? You're probably the next one up. That's going to get fired, and it's not going to be I quit kind of thing. It's, well, you made big mistakes here and you're gone. So I love that. I appreciate you bringing that to light more.
No, I really do appreciate your time today, Will. Dylan, as always, I appreciate your insight. And again, the goal here is simple. The goal is that we're going to give you the answers, some of the answers to the test, because when those boots get packed away for the last time and you step off in the civilian world, you're going to need a lot more answers. And sometimes you don't even know what questions to ask. So it's important that we have these conversations so you can listen in and hear what we're talking about, because just like you, we're transforming. We are forever evolving. We are figuring out every day what it means to be a veteran in the civilian world. If you haven't heard it from anybody recently, I'll say it to you now. Welcome home.